What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to week 2 of the monthly Mayhem series. This is the Dragbolt. If you're not familiar with what we're trying to do, Matt from the Scale Builders Guild and myself have taken it upon ourselves to challenge each other to a 1-month build off where we take the Axial SCX10-ii Deadbolt and try and make it as fast as possible. Now, what you see in front of me here is roughly my first week's effort. Matt and I both filmed our first episode a little while before we actually got it posted. So I've had a little bit over a week actually working on this vehicle. Kind of start from the outside and then go inwards. What you see in front of you here is the Axial SCX10-ii Deadbolt body and cage. It's basically intact. I've just done some very serious trimming around the wheel openings, and that's because I've lowered this thing as far down as you really possibly can. I'm running 60mm shocks all the way around. Those are actually off of my Sakura D3 drift car. That gives me a very minimal amount of suspension, but should be enough to kind of help absorb some of those hits. Now, as far as tires and wheels, I've been running 2 different setups during my first week of testing. I actually drove this car in its modified state for the first time yesterday, and I started out with the Pro Line Split 6 8th scale wheels and the Pro Line Prime tires on there. Now, these had the overall height that I was looking for, and I thought that the compound and the firm but a little bit of give to the foams, I thought these would be a good match. However, on the surface we tested on yesterday, it was not an ideal surface at all. It was something that we were really just going to think about doing a shakedown run on just to make sure everything was actually functioning, but we ended up putting down several passes. And during those passes on that uneasy and rough terrain, it ended up being better to go with the Sweep Racing belted radial tires. Now, these have almost no give. They're almost hard as a rock, it feels like, but the compound of the tires actually still has some good bite, and these things killed it on that pavement. To run either set of these wheels and tires, I am running an MIP 17mm adapter meant for a Traxxas slash. This means that I do not have a 12mm hex on there at all. The 17mm adapter slides right over the pin that goes in this axle shaft, and then the wheel slides on and you tighten that outer nut. In the rear of the vehicle, you can see that I've added this big Farbenkyber wing that's actually from a Traxxas vehicle of some sort. I just grabbed it because I thought it would be a good fit for this build, and then I made it work. I'll try and find the part number for that and throw that in the description below. The other thing that you can see from the outside is this front bumper crossmember that's been changed. There is no front bumper currently, but you can tell that I've replaced that front crossmember. And the reason that I've changed that front crossmember with the one that you see here is that this actually relocated my servo to the very front. This is the Vanquish front bumper CMS mount. I think this was initially intended for the Axial 2012 Jeep Wrangler. I've got a bunch of 3D printed parts underneath of this body, and all of them I've already hosted the files on Thingiverse. So if you wanted to take a perfectly good deadbolt and destroy it like I am, all of my parts are available. Have at it. But with that covered, let's take the body off and I'll show you what we've got going on underneath. To go fast, I knew I needed to do 2 things. 1, put a fast motor in it, and 2, really look into the gearing. Now, I went round and round and round trying to figure out what transmission I was going to add to this vehicle. Now, if you're familiar with other forms of RC, you probably know that finding a center differential, not that difficult. There's tons of options and tons of vehicles from 8th scale to short course, all kinds of different options. However, the hard part is that you either have to find one that accepts drive shafts, which is next to impossible, or you have to run dog bones. And if you want to try and run dog bones, you have to find one that runs the same size dog bone cup on the transmission and find that same option that will bolt onto a 5mm output of your pinion shafts. That is not an easy task. Now, how I conquered this problem was I went over to my friend Tony's house, and I was actually going to look at running a low-C Baja Ray transmission because it has a center differential and it's made to use drive shafts, at least on one side. And you can actually take the output from the center differential and add it to the other side as well. Tony had all of those parts. I was gonna go over there, take a look at it, and be on my merry way trying to fit that big low-C Baja Ray transmission into this vehicle. While I was there though, he pulled out this Losi SCTE center differential setup, which is a very basic pinion spur. Exactly what I would have wanted, but much harder to find where you could bolt a drive shaft up to it. However, while we had all of those parts there in front of us, the output adapter for the Losi Baja Ray looks very similar to the inside of the dog bone output that this Losi SCTE center diff runs. However, the diameters are off. The shoulders and the pin locations were almost the exact same. It was just that outer diameter. If you remember, I had a small metalworking lathe. I actually have that lathe set up at Tony's house right now. Happened to be that we were there, had those parts. I was able to chuck up those Losi outputs from the Baja Ray and turn the diameter down on that lathe to then be able to fall right into this Losi SCTE center differential. Now I've got my perfect transmission setup with drive shaft outputs on it. So at that point, I brought the transmission setup to my office and started modeling it. I modeled up that center diff and put it into the model of the frame rails, and I started working around and coming up with a design for a center skid plate to hold that center transmissions. I want to try and keep the drive shaft angles as straight as possible on this vehicle. Any angle that you put in those drive shafts is just going to build up heat, build up resistance, all those things. If I was gonna fit all of this in here, I had to get all of the links out of the way. So all the links came out of the truck, put the transmission in there, and then I decided I would figure out the link mounts down the road. In order to put the transmission in, get it low enough to where I wanted, keep it on center line, and fit the motor that I'm using, I ended up having to cock the whole thing at about 30 degrees to fit it. I incorporated a front link mounting system using the Vanquish dual shock link mounts. These were designed originally for the Axial Bomber. Those tie into the 3D printed skid plate and an existing hole in the side of the chassis to kind of hold everything together. So with the transmission and front link mounts done, the ride height set with these short 60mm drift car shocks that I put on here, I was having a few clearance issues in the front now, so I came up with a high clearance crossmember to make sure that I cleared everything during the small amount of suspension travel that I have. On that front crossmember, I added kind of a tongue that comes out the back of it, and I used that to mount both my Futaba receiver and my Futaba gyro. To keep this thing tracking straight at speed, I threw in the Futaba GYC 430 gyro. This is adjustable gain from the radio, so I can turn it down, turn it up, wherever I feel that it's working the best. Right now, it is controlling the stock Tactics servo that I'm still running in this car. I mentioned the link setup in the front. I am running a triangulated 4-link front suspension, and as I mentioned earlier, I've got that front chassis mounted servo. So I am running a 4-link with chassis mounted servo. That's not the best because you will have bump steer. You can't run a triangulated 4-link with a chassis mounted servo and not have bump steer. It might be minimal, but you're gonna have it. This one has it. The only saving grace is that I don't have very much suspension travel, so there's not a lot of range of motion for it to actually steer. Down the road though, as speeds increase, it's gonna be something that I may have to look at in order to keep this thing as stable as possible. That front chassis mounted servo, I had to space down off of that bumper mount, and I'm actually running the drag link below the tie rod, which is mounted below the standard steering arm on the Vanquish SCX10-ii knuckles that I've got mounted in the front. So my steering is definitely hanging way, way down there. For the motor and ESC at this time, I'm running the takeout from a Losi Baja Ray, and that is a Dynamite Fuse 3800 kV motor and the Fuse 130 ESC. Not the highest quality, but for now it's getting the job done. I wanted a fast motor. 3800 on 3S is a lot of RPMs. As we get closer to the end, and if I feel the car can take it, I'll throw 4-cell in it and we'll just see if this system can hold it. Or if I'm getting to the point where I feel like I'm topping out what this motor and ESC can output, I'll absolutely throw something bigger in there. In the rear, we have two 3D printed cross members. The forwardmost one holds the upper links and is high clearance and designed to clear the axle during the suspension travel. Moving towards the rear is the one that holds that rear wing that we talked about earlier. That rear crossmember that holds the upper links, those rear upper links are super short. It's only running a 40mm link with Revo rod ends on both sides. It's super short, but again, I don't have a lot of travel, so my pinion angle isn't changing that much, and I've got a lot of link separation. The rear drive shaft on this car is very long, but very straight. right out of the pinion, straight shot to that center diff. However, the front drive shaft, not very long at all, and it's got a little too much pinion angle. I may try and lengthen those front upper links a little bit to try and get that pinion angle in better shape, but not try and lose too much caster. The 3D printed parts that you see on this car now are actually probably the 3rd or 4th generation of most of the parts that you see. Got one big box with everything that I've collected from this car, either the stock takeoff stuff or first round 3D prints and some of the other wheels and tires that I've got. I'm definitely going to keep these Proline Split 6 and Primes around, because if I find the right location, I think that I would rather run these Primes, because I think that that larger rollout could really help me. Now, on to the results of yesterday's run. So yesterday, as we started running, I initially had a 13-tooth pinion and a 42-tooth spur on this vehicle, and I was running the Proline Split 6 and Primes. I was running a 3S 5200 milliamp battery from RC Juice, but I really didn't have a battery mount figured out, and I still don't. It's still on the list. I need to get something decent designed and put in the vehicle. So what we did yesterday was just put it in the rear here and zip tie it in place with 2 zip ties. Now, the combination of these tires and that really bumpy road, we were able to get a number of passes in just on the edge of control. And the very first passes that we put through this vehicle, we hit a top speed of 39.6 miles per hour. Way faster than I had initially thought we would be able to hit on the very first round. That open center differential was definitely noticeable, that it was having the front end pull more so than the rear. It would get a little bit sketchy and a little bit out of line, but that front end would pull it straight pretty quickly. I also think that the Futaba gyro aided in keeping that car going somewhat down the center of that road. So from there, we brought the vehicle inside, tested the heat on a number of the components of the vehicle. The motor was getting hot, and I was thinking that it was maybe being under geared. So we decided to take off the 13-tooth pinion and throw on a 16-tooth pinion. We also, at that time then, took off the Proline wheels and tires just because they seemed a little bit too bouncy, and we threw on these Sweep Racing belted radials. These are about 4 inches tall. These are about 4.3 inches tall. So we lost a little bit of rollout there, but we added some gearing to try and help overcome that. Also, we started checking the temps on a number of other things. The rear axle housing in this vehicle was at 147 degrees, and that was the plastic. So we pulled the diff covers off and packed as much grease as we could in there. There was grease on them already, we had checked that, but it needed more. So we took and we just packed the diffs on both sides full of some white lithium grease from A-Main on their ProTech line. Also, when we were taking off the diff covers, in the front, after the very first run, I had already taken one tooth off of the ring gear and taken the tips of most of the other teeth off as well. It was still spinning enough though, so at this time, I'm still running it. It's still in there, but it is on the list to take off. But for the rest of the day, I was running it with a damaged front ring and pinion. So after those couple of changes, we took it back out and did some more runs. On the next set of passes, we were able to hit a speed of 42.5 miles an hour. Already much faster than I thought I was going to go on week 1. So back inside again, just tweaking, looking at a few things, adjusting some things on the steering, on the gyro gain, added more toe out to the front for stability, and headed back out. Now, all of this was on the same battery. When we started, around 4.2 per cell. On this last set of runs, when we went out, we were sitting around 3.96 per cell. So we lost a good amount of voltage, but we kept climbing in speed. So on the last set of outings for the day, with a 1642 gearing, the Sweep Racing tires and wheels, a little bit more toe out, and that same battery pack, we were able to do back-to-back passes of 47.5 and 47.6 miles an hour. It was extremely sketchy though to try and hold that throttle and keep this thing going in a straight line. And after hitting that high speed of 47.6, I thought I would try for one more attempt. So sent it down the road, went as far out as I had ever gone to try and get as much run towards me as I could, came down the street, hit just a nasty bump in the road, and it pitched the whole car in the air and threw it sideways. At that time, it just did a nice sliding maneuver and smashed into my GoPro. I run a little GoPro vlogging setup. That's my GoPro camera, the audio adapter, an external mic, and a Joby GorillaPod. And when this car hit it sideways at 40 plus miles an hour, the whole thing exploded. It sounded like a driver hitting a golf ball, and just parts flew everywhere. I was worried, ran up to it, looked at the camera, and it was still recording. That helped me breathe a little bit easier. I had to go find all of the parts, including the external microphone, the cables, the legs for my GorillaPod, the whole deal. Got it all together, and almost everything survived without any issue. The body, however, did take a nasty hit. It put a huge gouge almost through the body in the side, and then the filter ring of my GoPro left 2 very nice creases in the side of the door panel. So the first battle scars on the body turned out to be from my own camera. So week 1 went way out of hand, and I got way deeper into the speed than I ever thought I would have on the first shot. Now week 2 is coming, and I've got ideas and plans that are pretty drastic still. So I'm gonna dig in, I'm gonna, really try and turn up and see what I can do. And most importantly, we're gonna try and find a location where I can really let this thing get down. I'm going to push this car as hard as I can. By the end of this series, I will be very surprised if this vehicle is still salvageable. But after the first week of testing, I'm addicted to this project. I can't stop thinking about it, and all I wanna do is go fast. So that is my in-depth look at everything I've done to this vehicle in week 1. Definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Again, I'll host all of my 3D printed files. You guys can have at them, do whatever you'd like. I'm absolutely looking forward to week 2 and pushing this car even harder. I hope you guys are enjoying this build. I absolutely am. Make sure and like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're not already. Go watch Matt's video as well. I'll link it in the description below. And we'll see you guys on the next one.